This is why I've articulated the need for a new resistance, that we have to put the 20th century behind. We are now fucking 26 years into the 21st century, or 25, and we are still saying, oh, this person's a communist, this person's a Marxist, this person's a fascist, this person's a Nazi. Where do we need to be that we can transcend, negate, like take your pick, right? Get the fuck out of this metric of left, right, within these 20th century concepts. Like, come on already, right? If we just want to call them communist, Marxist, socialist, and then, okay, we know to be against them, well, you don't actually know how they think and the full spectrum domination that they practice. They don't just operate through the left. They also operate through the right. They operate through many planned and staged things.
Good morning, Nick Petrozello here. It is Tuesday, March the 24th. And we're doing episode 3 of How the Ruling Class Understands and Uses Power with our special guest, Xoaquin Flores. And I cannot say enough about this guy. One of the hardest working guys out there. You can check his work out over at New Resistance on Telegram, and also join his Patreon. I'm going to have the link in there. Xoaquin, you work harder than just about anybody out there I know when it comes to, like, you're willing to do these 2 and 3 and 4, sometimes longer, like monologues on your Telegram, and it's information dense too. It isn't like you're just talking about the weather. I'm gonna send the clip of you saying that to my wife so she can appreciate the work I put in. You know, I think maybe she needs to hear from someone else. But yeah, no, it's no, I have a good time with it. That's probably what she picks up on. It's always, I think, liberating when you work for yourself, but I see myself as like working for the public. And yeah, it's the Telegram channel at New Resistance on Telegram. And I think with Twitter, I did restart a Twitter after having my Twitter canceled. I just heard that Tommy had his Twitter canceled. I had mine canceled 6 or 7 years ago. But when I reach 1,000 people, like I'm at like 900 or something, when I reach 1,000 people, I'll probably start tweeting again. So don't be shy to find me on Twitter. We'll put the link. And when I hit 1,000, maybe I'll start to tweet. I don't know. Nice. So before we get into it, also take a look in the description. Besides those links we just discussed, I have a free algo that I wrote. It's our paid sponsor, Algo Factory. And it's a video. It's a very short and easy video. We put the keys of the kingdom, the financial kingdom, in your hands. So you don't even have to have much more than a high school math level education, right? I could teach just about anybody this. And as AI is taking everybody's jobs, one of the last things to fall, if anything, would be the markets. So we teach people how to extract money from the markets. Check that clip out. It's really cool, easy, and I'm a really good coach. Just have to pat myself on the back. Now, Xoaquin, I'm going to turn it over to you. And we were just kind of talking beforehand about the setup here. So, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put you front and center and let you do your thing. Xoaquin Flores, what are we talking about today?
Well, so last time, Nick, we were talking about how the educational system for, the elite, so-called elite, right? Educational system, the secondary, post-secondary system, that they're actually teaching their managerial class and, elements of the ruling portion of the owning class, all the things that are how the system works, but through opposition. Because if they were to overtly champion it, then, as we were saying last time, all of the regular other professors at like other regular, community colleges and state colleges would be like, hey, like, what is this corporatist fascism being taught at the mainstream university? So they put it through this left-wing lens that they're like criticizing all these things, but they're actually reinforcing that this is how the system works. And that problem doesn't stay with the students of the so-called, Ivy League, so-called elite post-secondary and secondary institutions like colleges and universities, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, et cetera, or Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. And what they reinforce this reality, and then you'll note that like all of these very well-known anti-capitalist professors like come from those institutions, and that underscores that they actually are training people to frame with and accept the logic of that reality. So even though there's many decent criticisms of the system, there's a trade-off and a serious question as to the underlying point to actually reify and solidify our relationship to the system. You know what? It's almost like if you ever seen the old horror movie Carrie, her mother.
Yeah, man, it's one of my first.
Right? Like her mother is such a Jesus freak, is such a Bible thumper and she's like so reinforcing like evil, hell, and Satan that's actually the energy that this girl absorbs, right? It's not all the positive stuff that you could take potentially from the religion. It's like the fear, the negativity. It's like the mom is practically worshiping Satan by warning of Satan, right? So that's kind of like this system that I'm talking about in the educational system. And it's also how the World Economic Forum frames everything. The World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, like he's writing his books and the lectures and the whole discourse is aimed at the center left to far left professors and students. And they make it sound like they're critical of these things. They make it sound like they're the voice, like they're like some check, right? Like there's some critique of the system of the IMF. When at the end of the day, and not even at the end of the day, at the start of the day, middle of the day, and at the end of the day, the World Economic Forum is a little more than the think tank of the IMF, but they pose as if they're warning about the excesses of crony capitalism and, you know, where the human element can be realized in some way. So you find time and time again, whether you're talking about COVID-19, the Great Reset, whether you're talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Klaus Schwab, whether you're talking about stakeholder capitalism, you find that they borrow the concepts and the ideas from the old Communist Party slogan, which is people before profit. That was like their slogan for many decades, probably since Gus Hall and onwards. Just a moment. So drop the Das Kapital. I want to get into these things because there's really, if you understand them, you're going to understand their ideas. And it's, as we were saying before, I'm going to sound like Klaus Schwab, you know, we have been woefully insufficient in our understanding of the globalists. If we just want to call them communist, Marxist, socialist, and then, okay, we know to be against them, well, you don't actually know how they think and the full spectrum domination that they practice. They don't just operate through the left. They also operate through the right. They operate through many planned and staged things. And very interesting, since the book is right here, I want to show you two different things we talked about how they talk about the things that they're actually doing in the form of warning about them. On page 167, 166, and 167 of the print edition, why this is important to hold the book up and to show you it's in here. This is not a fake copy. The internet's full of crazy things, Nick, and there are people quoting other books that say other things that are, very disturbing, but they're not actually from this book, and people are wrongly claiming to quote parts from his books, and that's a very bad propaganda strategy. I don't know who like the person that's doing it thinks, I don't know what their thought is, but most people just don't cross-check it and they share it. But this is literally from that book, okay? And what I'm going to read to you is this is not a literature review, right? This is a guidebook about how the ruling class, so to speak, should approach COVID-19 and the Great Reset, and how they want left-wing university professors, like center left to all the way left, to think about this. So they constantly use references and framings and the discourse of the left. In fact, the whole linear concept of like industrial revolutions, like first, second, third, fourth, like we're supposedly entering the fourth. These are all borrowed from Marxian ideas contained in many of his works, but such as the German Ideology and the Communist Manifesto, for example. in this one, again, he's not talking about, oh, here are some cool TV shows to check out. He's saying in section 1.6.3 on page 166 that all of these great changes in the macro reset that they're planning, like they're planning to do this, but they're writing about it like they're just warning about they're talking about the trade-offs. Like, here are the good parts, but maybe some bad things might happen. But anyone that's ever worked in management or ever had a job like knows that at the boardroom, when they're talking about problems that are foreseeable, they have to talk about those in a negative sense. Like, they have to say, oh, well, there might be layoffs, even though the business plan is to do layoffs. Like, they literally just had some people come in to do time and motion studies and to downsize the company. But when they talk to the workforce, they say, hey, the markets have been, unpredictable, and we've got these trade issues and regulations. So the bad thing is there might be layoffs, right?
If I
but
may,
actually, right?
You're talking about like an emotional inoculation of the masses, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
They're setting people up, but they're just saying, oh, lamentably, there could be layoffs, right? So lamentably, in the macro reset, there's these risks of dystopia. We hope to avoid them, and he goes, now that information and communication technologies permeate almost every aspect of our lives and forms the social participation, any digital experience that we have can be turned into a product destined to monitor and anticipate our behaviors. Sounds like exactly how the internet works. The risk of possible dystopia stems from this observation. So the risk of possible dystopia, right? Over the past few years, it has nourished countless works of art, ranging from novels like The Handmaid's Tale to TV series like The Black Mirror. In academia, it finds its expression in the research undertaken by scholars like Xoaquin in her book, Surveillance Capitalism, which warns about customers being reinvented as data sources, with surveillance capitalism transforming our economy, politics, society, and our lives by producing deeply anti-democratic asymmetries of knowledge and the power that accrues to knowledge. And by the way, Xoaquin Zuboff is a left-wing critic, and her book, Surveillance Capitalism, is talking about obviously the monetization of our online content. So, Handmaid's Tale, right? So this is in the story Handmaid's Tale. That is not a left-wing dystopia, right? That is like a right-wing theocracy, right? That happens because globalism fails. And then globalism fails. There's a civil war in the United States, and there's like some Charlie Kirk type figure that gets convicted of something, and there's like a trial, and him and his wife become like these kind of cause celebs of this theocratic movement. That's what the story's about. It tracks very similar to Charlie Kirk, except Kirk in our timeline is assassinated, which looks like it was meant to trigger. It's part of another thing, right? That didn't happen. And that if you watch The Handmaid's Tale, right, which is produced by Hillary Clinton for Hulu, okay, there's this kind of fascist, theocratic, misogynistic, whatever, right, misogynistic state. Despite all of that, they have like this chief economist. He's like the minister of the economy of this Gilead Republic, okay? And they show his bookshelf, right? So he's supposed to be a Christian right-wing theocrat, right? But prominent on his bookshelf is this book. Capital in the 21st Century by Jeremy Pickett, okay? And this was written as an answer to and a continuation of the analytic style, and in a very similar way, it's with the same underlying worldview, okay, as Karl Marx's Das Kapital, right? So in other words, like whether it's a far right regime or a far left regime, whatever methods and types of governments that are in their plans, and I'm not black pill, dude. I'm not saying all potential outcomes are their plans. We can identify what their plans are, but they do understand the world through this academic lens because they're all educated in that way. And all of their educations have this Marxian analysis. So even in a theocratic right-wing, nationalist, right, their economic concepts are still Marxian. So they talk about Handmaid's Tale here, and then in Handmaid's Tale, in those episodes they show on the bookshelf this book in his collection, right, which is a continuation of Karl Marx's Capital. So the Piketty's book is Capital in the 21st Century. Now, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I don't know if it's coming up.
No, that one's not coming up too well.
Overexposed. There we go.
There you go. If you just show the front of it, it's probably better.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The Fourth Industrial Revolution. The opening chapters are almost plagiarized. Well, academically, you would say plagiarized because in the index, they don't mention Karl Marx, but they're completely describing Marx's materialist view of history. And he's explaining the trajectory of industrial revolutions, starting with pre-industrial revolutions, such as the agrarian revolution. And that's what you get primarily out of Marxist texts like Communist Manifesto and German Ideology. So someone has to read all these in order to talk about them, I guess, right? But anyone can find, a lot of these are PDFs you can also get online if you're interested. And the what they're explaining is called a materialist view of history. And what they're saying is that philosophically, this tracks somewhat because you could break down your worldview to being either fundamentally materialist or fundamentally idealist, right? In other words, idealism would be like, for example, my brother and I, some months back when he was visiting here, went to this monastery that's dedicated to a monk, a priest that is now deceased, who's been he's been canonized as a saint in the Orthodox Church, and his name is Father Saint Tade, and he has like written books about religion, spirituality, so to speak, within the rubric of Christian orthodoxy. But you could condense a lot of his ideas into a single line, which is the inscription on his tombstone, which is that the thoughts that we have determine the course of our life, right? That's an idealist worldview, right? Now, a materialist worldview is that the course of your life determines the thoughts that you have. Okay, so if the Marxist, the materialist, but that's also going to be these corporatists, you can call them capitalists, crony capitalists, whatever you want to call them. We're not even saying, the statists. It could be libertarians. It could be anyone, right? Anyone that, if they're saying that the broader overarching material conditions of your life are the most determinative in the outcomes of your life, right? They're framing your life in a disempowering way. They're telling you, like, there's a trade-off, Nick. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you're a judge and you're trying to understand maybe some of the reasons that a criminal broke a law, and you're thinking, am I going to give him 30 years or 25 years? And, well, his father beat him, or he grew up in poverty, or whatever. Like, those are things that might be mitigating circumstances, and like that, we might say, okay, personal agency has its limits, maybe, right? But the materialist worldview is like one where people have almost no agency at all. And even though it seems like at first, like this is like flattery, like this is being given to you, like forgiveness, like you have no agency, it's not your fault. But it's also saying that you're going to accept that macro systems have total control over the outcomes in your life.
Well, so let me ask a question here, because it always seemed to me that people, WEF, Great Reset, all that, they want to treat us as animals.
That's
So
it.
if you're going to convince people they have no agency, they are effectively animals.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. And so Marx talks about this difference between materialism and idealism, and here he puts like the idea that idealism is like superstitious and mystical thinking of the past, right? And we're like progressing, like progressivism, like from the past, which was like religion, mysticism, superstition, belief in, angels and devils and leprechauns and, whatever. Don't step on a crack or you fall and break your back, like these types of things. And now we're moving towards science and reason, right? You had within Marx's coming around not long after, Darwin and his Origin of Species. So you have this, whereas science is actually a product of religion. The 19th century, you had philanthropists and ideologists. You had philanthropists backed by certain big elites we won't name for purposes of not being deplatformed. But later on, it would be Rockefeller who worked with these people. And they were promoting this worldview called science versus religion, right? And if you were to pose things like that to the progenitors of scientific thought, which is happening really since the origins of philosophy, going back thousands of years. But if you were even to go into early pre-modernity or the high Renaissance, like in the 16th century or even 17th century, and you were to say something like, well, the struggle is between science versus religion, people would look at you like, what the fuck are you talking about? That makes no sense. Like our understanding that the world can be reasoned with our intellect, that the outside world and the internal structure of our mind have this correspondence, that we can even understand the world, points to and is evidence of, this relationship between creation and the creator. So it was an ideological product of the mid 19th century to promote this view that it's science versus religion. That's actually quite novel. Like 150 years ago, 170 years ago is not that long ago, not compared to the at least 1,000-year-old history of the development of what we can more or less discern as science. So getting us to think in terms of accepting our position and to define ourselves within their materialist framework, even though they might promote a liberatory narrative within that controlling narrative. Like, in other words, like if you tell someone that they need to be liberated, they would first have to accept that they're not. You see?
Yeah, I got you there. So, yeah, you have to impose a conceptual prison on people, a mental prison,
Yes.
for them to think that they need liberation.
Yes. You have to, and the way that you're going to get them to accept that, most of the time, like definitely there will be the jackboot parts of this story, and there will be the austerity and the ugly faces and the mean things too. But there's like right and left. So the nice way that the way that they get, idealistic young people or professors or humanists or people with good intentions to accept slavery is to first say, like, we are slaves that need to be free. Like, we're here to be involved in your liberation from the slavery that you're in. And you're like, oh, I'm a slave. Well, being free is good. Yeah, I want to be free. Yeah, but if you're fighting for your freedom, then what does that mean about you right now? So it instead of people just behaving as if they are free, right, which is like totally destabilizing for these so-called elite structures and institutions. So they manage it both through overt and through, you can say that like they're like a bird that attacks with both wings, right?
Well, this is kind of like the basics that they teach us about the oppressor and oppressed. Like,
Right.
even if the oppression is either non-existent or overblown by whoever's telling you that you're oppressed, they're going to magnify that in your mind so that you're
Right.
going to, oh, all of a sudden I'm being oppressed.
That's right.
And that applies to like everybody. That's not
Yeah.
just, especially if you go back as a white dude, about 10 years ago, you started to hear about how white people are being oppressed all of a sudden. Now,
Right.
there may be truth, and I know there's truth to that. But I think a lot of people took that and ran with it to a level that might have been beyond the reality of what that oppression
That's
is.
absolutely right. Yeah. I think the distinction that you're touching on is, for example, I guess an analogy is easier. Um, let's say you're going to your car and some dude runs up and mugs you or tries to carjack you, right? Like, I'm not trying to say that when that's happening that you're actually not being victimized in that moment, right? But for you to then make that your identity, right? Like, I am a victim as some permanent, abstract, ongoing identity in perpetuity. So, in other words, like, yeah, we face injustices or unfair things happen. Sometimes we are victims of crime, right? In that moment. But that isn't our, even, and I don't want to touch like on too much. I don't want to, like, because people are in paradigms, but even people refer to themselves as a survivor. They haven't transcended that imposed dialectic of victimhood.
Well, it becomes like ontological permanence for them. It's
That's
just how
it.
they
It
be.
becomes a part of their being.
Yep.
And so
Which then dictates your actions, because basically you have an emotional coloring that will affect 24 hours of your day, at least of your waking day, and probably your sleeping night. Either way, your actions are all being influenced by the concept that you are now a victim, you're being oppressed. And this is what we talked about, I think, towards the end of the last episode,
yes,
in that when you are protesting something, you're giving it power, right? Now, it
yes,
has power. It's not like it doesn't have any power. It
that's
isn't
right.
like you weren't victimized. Sure, you were
There's nuance
victimized,
here. That's right.
but in your mind, if it, like, after the first few minutes of whatever happened, as long as it wasn't too severe, any like feelings that you have after an emotional moment, after like, I don't know, 7 seconds, you're just kind of doing that on your own. Like, if
Yes,
somebody says
yes,
something that upset you, like for 7 seconds or so, that's like a real reaction. After that, it's more like you're doing it to yourself. Now, obviously, if something severe happened, that's a little different. You have PTSD. Either way, though, there's a period of time after which you are doing this to yourself, right?
if the degree the you're doing it to yourself, or you've made an agreement that you're living in someone else, to live in someone else's thought paradigm, right? You've become a prisoner to this mass delusion, that you've accepted this mass narrative and have, as you said, internalized it and made it a part of your ontological reality, your being. And so this is very much like when where this leads to when we're talking about color revolutions or astroturf movements. If you can get a demographic, a cohort, a group that you're studying and looking at how you can manipulate them or get them to take action so that you can wield that as political leverage. It can be in regular politics, color revolution things. Think about with Antifa and BLM, for example, right? Think about the mass delusion or mass hysteria where the participants, why is violence justified, right? How do they justify violence, right? Well, against people that have not done violence directly to them. Well, they say, well, there's systemic violence, there's institutional violence, and this random person on the street, or these 25 people having coffee at this cafe, or this, beat traffic cop, right, are symbolic or actual representations of a broader system of violence and oppression. So our instantiations of violence against them right here and now are not unprovoked. We're responding to their institutional violence with righteous violence. This is our violence is righteous. It's retribution, right? It's justice. So, and that is exactly a created paradigm, because when people internalize their sense of irrational levels of being oppressed or exploited, right, then there are no limits to the justice. There's no limits to the violence, right, that you can justify doing. So in other words, if you can't articulate the number or the degree or the amount that you've been wronged, then there's no limit to your response. So all of these things are organized. So this is like, the things I'm talking about are not just some pet theories of my fucking self, right? This is all in the peer review literature on the subject. This is all sociology. This is all, Durkheim and deviance and Weber and class systems. This is all out there. And this is what people learn in secondary and post-secondary educations, but they learn about it like the system's doing wrong, which is like true that the system's doing wrong, but the system actually uses sociology to do the wrong, but we learn it in school as if these are the tools to fight against that oppression. So it's a total fucking Gordian knot. It's totally twisted.
Yep, it's a twisted control mechanism to have a, like I said earlier, it's a persistent. That's like a casus belli. It's just getting people on edge all the time, feeling that they've been victimized, so that they will do things. This is
pre-traumatic stress disorder, like Gilad Azmon says.
Say that again.
Like the Israeli satirist and musician Gilad Azmon says, pre-traumatic stress disorder. Like he talks about people. Well, he talks about a certain people, but we can apply that, more broadly, even in any victimological framing. Any victimhood-driven ideology or worldview is like, we're just talking about protesters attacking random people on the street because they're not sufficiently supporting the protesters. And those protesters think that they've convinced themselves that they're responding to systemic violence that hasn't yet occurred to them from those people.
Yeah, the oppression isn't all imagined, but
that's right.
Some of it really is.
That's what we were talking about last time. There's nuance in this. This is not like it's all in your mind stuff. It's what are the effective tools, right? What are the effective tools of resistance to actual injustice, which are not created by the system of injustice to feed this dialectic? See, that's really the question that maybe in the next episode we can get into, but understanding that many of the so-called tools that we've been handed, or the agreements that we've accepted to live in a dream or nightmare that has been conjured in another person's or institution's mind, and that if even that is the framework of resistance to that oppression, then we are still in that, forgive the cliche, we're still in that matrix.
Yeah, right. Back to the crowd.
Yes.
And they're reacting to, the protesters reacting to systemic, whatever it is. This is a really interesting concept. We all know about it. Those of us who are, following at least someone like you or someone like me over in Rogue, whatever, it's something we've talked about for years. We joke about it. Oh, it's, you have these suburban, like, white wine moms who are in the technically upper middle class, and they feel oppressed because someone's not going to allow them to abort their baby at 9.5 months or whatever it is. Like, so all of a sudden it's women's rights. And this is such a severe thing. And this goes back to what they've done is they've hijacked people, and they do it on every level. Like, if you look at people on their phones, their addiction to social media, they're hijacking the dopamine. Everyone talks about that now. If you look at something like OnlyFans or whatever, you're hijacking, it's dopamine. It's also the sexual impulse. If you look at the high level blackmail, you look at probably what happens at a lot of these, like it's going to happen to the mid level guys that think they're not, that they think they're elites, but they're really not. And they're probably being bribed with sex a lot. They're just hijacking their evolutionary instinct.
That's right. That's right.
So
Yeah,
everything
it's an amygdala
comes
response.
amygdala. Yeah. So you were saying that earlier. So I think it's that what they're doing is they're finding the amygdala response. They're finding the way they can hijack and control people based on their primal urges.
Yes.
Although I think what you're talking about is a little beyond primal. It's more conceptual, but still,
Correct. But
it is and it's not.
Fundamental,
right?
it's that. Fundamental, it's that. But now you're manipulating regions of the neocortex.
That feed into the
that
more
feed
primal
into the amygdala. But now it's more complex thought forms. Like, in other words, the violence is amygdala, right? The justification for a Homo sapien, higher order mammal or whatever, for a human being, where you have cortex and neocortex development, so to speak, on built over that overlay on top of that amygdala. We have to rationalize or justify violence unless you are right now being attacked. Like if there's not a fist right now, like slamming into your head, right? You have to justify being violent first. And that's abstract, unless you're just a sociopath, but that can be induced as well. But most people that are being misled or corralled or herded into committing violence have a framing worldview. You have that on, with soldiers, military, you have that with protesters, you have that, so the whole gamut. We're not talking about, the problems of the left. These are human problems that like no one has really transcended without at least being aware of them first. And then it's a lifelong work, maybe. I don't know. I'm pretty violent myself, so I don't know. I'm not, but the point is that we legitimize violence, we justify it through a worldview. You get into worldview studies, but this is like, because we have these more complex parts of the brain. But you mentioned the crowd and studies of the crowd. I mentioned Le Bon, and a lot of these even go back to some of the insights of a French anarchist, also French, named Proudhon. And Proudhon is an anarchist, but he's very interesting because him and Marx had arguments. Proudhon wrote a book called The Philosophy of Poverty. Marx wrote a retort to that called The Poverty of Philosophy. And
Nice.
But in the Philosophy of Poverty, see, Proudhon is a lot like you and I. He's an individual, and he distrusts crowds, and he distrusts this process later that Le Bon would characterize as mass formation. But these men are only separated by 20, 30, 40 years. So Proudhon is talking about mass formation before Le Bon. And Proudhon is saying, like, on the one hand, like, he sees this corrupt system. He sees this system of so-called elites. He sees this class system, and he sees the control paradigm metric of his time, which would have included the corrupt Lutheran and Catholic churches. It would have included secular institutions, universities. It would have included intelligence agencies and police departments. It would have included the oligarchs of the Gilded Age and the industrialists. It would have included the bankers and the financiers, elected officials, kings and queens, all of them, right? So he understood that was here. But then down here, he sees the masses. And then he also sees the way that the dialectic, the reaction and the protests of masses against those systems, like, is equally troubling to him. You see, he talks about, like, if I could just launch into that crowd with my closed fist, like he sees this problem on both ends, right? And that line of thinking would develop later in the 20th century, and become part of the third position that has a lot of interesting things to explore, but in one has to always approach that like the most delicate, lest one be accused of supporting these ideas in their full or whatever, and then you're permanently deplatformed from life. So, but it's interesting that the most banned views, right, that the ones that have a lot of interesting nuance with regard to this relationship between the individual and systems of oppression, and then mass formation of so-called resistance to oppression, right? This is why I've articulated the need for a new resistance, that we have to put the 20th century behind. And it's so interesting, Nick, because in the 20th century, in 1950 or 1930 or 1970, take your pick, nobody was accusing someone of being a Bonapartist or a Hamiltonian or a Jeffersonian or a Bourbon restorationist. You understand? Like in the 20th century, all of the political epithets and conflict were rooted in 20th century ideas. We are now fucking 26 years into the 21st century, or 25, right? Like, and we are still saying, oh, this person's a communist, this person's a Marxist, this person's a fascist, this person's a Nazi, this person's a liberal, whatever, right? These are still like, it's like, what is going to kick this off? It's going to be a transformative war, a great transformation, a fourth industrial revolution. Like what is the impetus? What conflict do we face, or can we avoid that? But where do we need to be that we can transcend, negate, like take your pick, right? Get the fuck out of this metric of left, right, within these 20th century concepts. Like, come on already, right? But they've got us there. That's what we were talking about before. So like, because this is about sociology, Nick, because this is about looking at the past, right, and then studying trends and then predicting the future, right? That's the root of my work, right? This is like, how do you test what you're doing, right? You need two things. You have explanatory power, and how do you test that? Well, you test that against predictive power, right? So that's why my forecasts make sense. That's why they bear so much fruition or whatever, right? So when you think about the sociological method, they understood that because they're saying, oh, look, there's all this history, and the ideas of the time corresponded to the material nature of that time, right? Now, they would say that the matter is creating the ideas. And then, of course, there's going to be ideas that are born from that matter that will influence the innovation of that will be ideas born from that matter, material conditions that will influence the direction or innovations of the material, but they still root it fundamentally. So I don't want to be a reductionist in explaining their dialectical method, because it is dialectical, but they put the matter at the foundation. Okay.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
The truth is that our thoughts or our souls are at the foundation of everything. And once you understand that, you explode out of this metric that they've created. Right.
Right. So to summarize that, and hopefully I get it correct here, what you're saying is that it is dialectical. It's a left-right paradigm, for example, right? Just one example of that. Right. What they, if you will, are trying to do is to rob us of our agency, in that you're either this or you're that, and there's no other choice, right? So, but that is theoretically, if the matter, if you will, the materialistic nature, your life's experience, the way the world is, you just live this life was done to you, that's why you're this way, that makes it so you have to be either or. But if you put your spirit and your agency at the foundation of your life, then you can break out of this either or mold, right? This dialectic. Like, hey,
Yes.
there's more than just left or right. There's actually nuance. And I will tell you that.
Well, yes, I want to continue if I can say, Nick.
Yeah,
so
please.
there's a four-way trap. Okay. So there's left and right. Okay. And those are both people accept roles, and most of even the right is materialist. Okay. But there's also a trap of idealism versus materialism as well. Okay. Because you can embrace an idealism that says like, no, like I'm creating this reality, right? And I've transcended all morals and ethics. In other words, I am my own God. I am my own prophet. I am my own discerner of truth, right? That's another false trap. This is like Aleister Crowley, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, right? So this is like, so then if you're going to be idealist, right, then it's to be a Satanist. You understand?
Yeah,
so,
completely. Yeah, it's too extreme.
Not right. So there's layers in this, man. Yeah. But what I wanted to say is that the way that they have projected that we will apprehend and approach the coming changes, they're already trying to shape that based upon their understanding of how the gears and mechanisms of history has unfolded. That's what this book is about in the main.
It's like a predictive programming type thing.
Well, he mentions actually the same author in this one. I just mentioned two predictive programming type media that he mentions in a concerned way, right, as a dystopia, but Handmaid's Tale and the different episodes of the Black Mirror are what the internet calls predictive programming. I would use the word differently, but nevertheless, yes. And with the, Proudhon leads to thinking in a body of thought, including later people like Georges Sorel, that are trying to synthesize the things that make sense from Marx without submitting their spirit or their agency to this materialist reductionist worldview that actually leads you back into the trap, right? Because there's kernels of truths everywhere. You can't just be like, the whole point of this is about not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Right? You see, like the things could not work. Like things could not be convincing. Things could not work if there were not elements of truth to it. The only thing that can work, the only thing that actually has power in the world is truth, right? And subverting that subverting that, you can use an element of the truth and harness that power and direct it in other directions, or throw a kink in it, or place it upon a false premise. There's all types of ways that this can be done, but there are truths everywhere. Does that make sense? So,
oh yeah, that's a typical thing you hear. Like the best lies are coded in the truth. And what I'm gathering, and I've thought about this before myself, but polarization tends to be the problem, right? Too much of idealism, too much materialism, too much left, too much right. It seems that when people are polarized, they're easily manipulated.
Yes, and that is a lot of how that speaks much to how political systems in parliamentary systems maintain power. But as we were saying in the last episode, those differences and divisions or tribalisms even within the in-group are natural. So we can make the error of then again surrendering agency through the gargoyle effect of basically talking their book and basically saying that they have all this power when they manipulate, or that they have so much power to create these differences between us. And the thing is that there are differences between us, and that is true, right? The truth is always good. Good is always true. Yeah. So when we say, oh, the elites have created these differences between us, we're giving them far more power than they have. And then we're not understanding how we can utilize or build power with and through those differences that are natural. See, if we just think they're unnatural or that, then we want to reject it. And then if we then say that the elites have created those differences, then we've handed them like godlike powers. We're protesting against them.
Correct. Yeah. Giving them power. Not to say they don't have power, but you're maybe giving them too
right.
much. Yeah.
That's
power
it.
they don't really actually have.
That's right.
It's a form of hypnosis. It's that mass formation you were talking about earlier.
Yes, it is. Yes. It's like it's hypnosis, and it's like you were saying, people internalize it at an ontological level. It determines their being, and that's going to determine their thoughts. Their thoughts are going to become predictable, and they're going to be very, very controllable if they're that predictable. And we have not given, I want to, like Klaus Schwab, we have insufficiently surprised the elites with our flexibility. I'm very worried about the things I see across YouTube and the furtherance of, left-right discourse, simplification of things. But I understand there's also they aren't responsible for the cognitive differences amongst and between people, right? They didn't have the power to create those cognitive differences, but we would make the mistake to be like, oh, they're dumbing us down. Well, yeah, they're doing certain things. Maybe it's adding fluoride to the water. Maybe it's like fast moving content on social media, high sugar in the diet, like things like this. Like, of course, those things are going to dumb you down. And that is advantageous to a certain extent to certain elites in certain historical periods based upon certain geographic dynamics, certain geopolitical dynamics. It's not a universal truth that it's good to dumb your population down. They do exacerbate cognitive differences in the population or try to insulate themselves from that. Like you hear Bill Gates they were younger at the time, doesn't let their kids on social media or have a tablet or a smartphone, right? He understands the problems with Wi-Fi. He understands the safety issues and the cognitive decline, that mind rot is going to, you're going to get several orders of magnitude lower intelligence, IQ, from low attention span driven content. So
we rarely let the kids watch television, so that's one thing we are into at our house. But with dumbing the population down or not, I think that might also have to do with revolutions, if you will, because we had a situation 100 years ago, whatever it might be, where whoever decided the U.S. would lead things in a big way. So there needed to be an education of the population to like work in factories. And then you had the managerial revolution that you actually informed me about in a big way. And now it seems that we're in a place where it costs too much money to make things in the U.S., or at least it did 20, 30 years ago. It started to. And that seems to be when a lot of the dumbing down started. It's like, okay, we better get these guys dumb. But then they started educating themselves over in China. And now look where China is. And, not to be too trite about it, but it seems that the beginning of major economic booms, it seems that they tend to happen with a focus on the education of their masses. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's education, or mass education is a double-edged sword, and it's obviously in modernity is going to connect back to the refinement and improvement of the printing press. Like people know, I hope, or have heard about like the Gutenberg innovation or revolution. And before this period, there were other iterations and ways of printing that were a little less efficient. But before the mass publication of books, like books cost so much money. They were hand stamped, and before that, they were handwritten. It used to be monks in monasteries transcribing them by hand. So think about the rate of production of books. And I mean, you were probably lucky in certain cases if you could reproduce beyond the rate of deterioration of the books that already existed. Then you would have library fires and things like that could set back a people or a region or even a whole lot of that civilization by centuries or more. Right.
Well, the books were so valuable that I think in the Middle Ages, if you were not clergy and you were caught with a Bible, I think you were possibly put to death. It was such a big deal.
In the 19th century, there was less of a distinction between fascism and Marxism, socialism. Marx wrote about different types of socialist movements in the Communist Manifesto that he was opposed to, but he's describing different types of middle class or idealist socialism that would evolve into fascism. But in the 19th century, those distinctions weren't as well understood because there weren't, like, when Marx was alive, you didn't really have Marxists. You did have some group in France that called themselves Marxists, and Marx became aware of them and said, if those are Marxists, then I am not a Marxist. But the point is that in his time, he was just one socialist thinker among many. And there was an American progressive socialist, but he was a right-wing socialist in the 19th century named Bellamy. And he wrote like a fiction book called Looking Back, but he's also he was a education reformer and like pedagogist. And he's the reason that we do the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning, like many schools do. I did it growing up. Like all the kids at 8 a.m. or 8:20, when the bell rings, you come in the classroom, you file in either 2 lines or single file. Pretty regimented when you think about it. They're preparing you for factory work. Here's the bell, you line up, right? That's education. Like people talk about, oh, China and communism. It's like, no, we had it, okay? Like we had public schools. We had this. Like the bell rings, all the kids line up, stop goofing around, keep your hands to yourself, look forward. Okay, then you walk into the classroom, you march in 2 single file lines, and then you gather around the flagpole by the chalkboard, you put your right hand over your heart, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, for liberty, justice for all. Amen. Okay.
Hey, I'll do you one further. We actually marched out to the playground, and it looked like a military formation, each like 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade. We had drummers, like full on flag ceremony. This is elementary school.
Yeah, that's
like,
intense.
It was intense. I even did the drums on one of them.
So this is all Bellamy, but in Bellamy's time, it wasn't right hand over the heart. They did the Roman salute. And that's where we have a lot of that symbolism is actually in American, the fascists, the eagle with the fascists doing the Roman salute. This is like the socialist kind of proto-fascist American nationalist, right? Bellamy, 19th century. He also wrote, like I said, a fiction book called Looking Back, which is about a future socialist America and talking about the events that led up to like how this national type of socialism, so to speak, like developed in America. So it's but like you're saying, yeah, the managerial revolution was precipitated by the educational reforms of the late 19th century. Like you couldn't have had a managerial class of adults in the 1920s and 30s when the managerial revolution took place if you didn't have these late 19th century education reforms. You had similar in Germany, right? You had similar in Japan. You had the Bolshevik Revolution in the 19 teens, and the kids that were born then and went to school. Like you couldn't have had Stalinism arise in the 1930s if it wasn't for the Bolshevik education reforms 15 and 20 years before, right? Because Stalin was involved in the revolution early on, but he didn't come to power until the late 20s, and you don't really speak in terms of Stalinism until the 30s, right? Bolshevik Revolution was in 1917, right? So again, it's like you're saying, the education reforms come before that, and but education and how they get us to think, and these books, and what is the mainstream view of how the system works. Again, they teach it through opposition. They teach it like we're critical of it, and then here's the path to liberation.
That's why I find Starship Troopers to be such an interesting movie, to bring it to a very popular sort of lower level thought. But they bring that fascism right out where you can touch and taste it.
Yeah, it's the Starship Troopers is also based in this kind of that's Philip K. Dick, right?
Yep, I believe it. I believe it's based on his. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is he was a critic of these things. He's a bit more of a deconstructed or post-constructionist. There's almost like a kind of an LSD aspect to some of his stuff, but yeah, definitely it is. I think if we were to like review literature and late 20th century film and art, and through that lens, we would uncover a lot. But I think for today, I think this is good enough. I was really glad to be with you today, and to start to like look at some of these texts that, see, people are right now, dude. They're focused on the price of oil. They're focused on the war in Iran, or they're focused on, you know, whatever stuff going on inside the country, and the fact that these globalists they're not just globalists, right? Like the globalism is one aspect of it. They have and had another plan of anti-globalism, right? Which is not to say that people against globalism are falling into that trap. Don't get me wrong, but they have their version of it. That's the Handmaid's Tale, and other iterations of that. So it's like there's a difference between globalism and Handmaid's Tale, right? There's like a role for countries in the world that is neither to be a monopolar globalist hegemon or to create globalist institutions and global monoculture. And there's a difference between that and you know, the alternative route that they want to propose of collapsing the whole country, right? Collapsing the whole country into a civil war, and to pull the United States completely out of the world and to invest in other places. Like that's this other plan they have. And both of those are obviously, you know, wrought with danger, and they're not predetermined. Like we don't have to go down either path.
Well, and those aren't the only two paths either. But that's what
it's a false dichotomy.
It's a false dichotomy. And if you ask me, they're willing. It's almost like if you engineer one, it would fail into the other. Like if you push too much energy into one side of a dichotomy, the result may be through many mechanisms, but simply, I would say, inertia and gravity into the opposite dichotomy, right? If it fails.
Yes,
so what they're doing, in my opinion, is they're pushing the spring in one direction, and if it kicks back, they'll just bet on the other.
Yeah, that's they're also telling us pretty openly, you know, they're telling us pretty openly through film, through culture. What was the Obama did for Netflix, that movie about, very bad movie, but
terrible movie,
Civil War in the United States, you know. So
yeah, Kevin Bacon selling I don't want to. It's so bad. I would put it this way, like, so I'm in markets, right? You need volatility to make money in markets. So what you need is action. So what they'll do is, for example, on Friday, and this is like Trump, this is what he does. Markets close. He makes an announcement late on Friday or early on Saturday that's very bellicose, we're going to blow up Iran forever. Right. And then, like, right before the markets open, or as the futures markets open, he says, you know what? Actually, we're making a deal with Iran. And then everything shifts. So first, the markets blow way out of proportion in one direction. And then he says something and they blow right back in the other direction. And it's been proven that people are betting on both sides of that. And that's a microcosm.
The only good, I mean, not good. The only you can, because the FX markets like don't close on the weekends.
They do.
You can definitely You can definitely come up on exchange, on currency exchange after those statements, and you can go to a money changer, your favorite money changer, on a Saturday or a Sunday if you're lucky, and come up like that. But
you can't. I mean, I'm a forex trader by profession. It's my main income. I mean, the way to make any real money on that, if you're going to go to a currency exchange like over the weekend, is you have to hold a lot of cash, because the movements in currencies are like maybe 1% on a big day. So if you want to make 1% and make it mean something, you got to have like, I don't know, 100 grand or something like that. Then you'll make,
to pull out that $1,000.
Yeah, and then there's fees and but the actual like the forex markets that are electronic, they do close on Friday and open on Sunday, but
that sucks.
yeah, it's kind of sucks that way, but that's that's probably one of the reasons why Trump does what he does. But the analog to our discussion is that you push things in one direction, make money there because you know what's coming, or make profit, or make control, or control people, whatever you do, whatever your goal is. And then if that starts to reject, you literally nudge it in the other direction, knowing it's going to go in that direction. You take action to take advantage of that. And I see that as one of the things that like these world leaders are doing. It's just not necessarily financial. It's more about controlling people.
Yeah, it's these Trump's announcements. You see it with Iran. You see the all types of related markets move around in real time, and I'm looking at mostly. I look at the euro and dollar versus Serbian dinar, and euro versus Serbian dinar, and then I look at the ruble, and you can really get a sense of the geopolitical relationships between these countries through the changes in exchange value rates after these announcements are made. A lot of people do the right thing too. They analyze the geopolitical situation to understand where foreign exchange rates will be or where they would expect them to land. But it works the other way too. And you can definitely see like the Serbian dinar is influenced by the dollar, it's influenced by the ruble, and it's influenced by the euro. It's basically like the Serbian dinar is a composite of like those three other currencies.
Yeah, our friend Tom Luongo is like really good at that. He also will watch bond market spreads, same kind of thing.
The bond market stuff. I mean that's what's driving. The dollar has been pretty weak against the euro for almost the past year. But a year ago, it was almost like 1-to-1. It was like a euro was equal to $1. Now, like today, as we're talking, it's got to be like 0.86 euros to buy, like 86.4 to buy a dollar. And
it's a lot of it's because everything that's going on is causing money to go to ground everywhere. So the Europeans, they in the beginning of 2025, they sold out of a lot of U.S. equities and they pulled their money in from around the world, and they're just going to cash because a couple things that they have to shore up their economy, and they also just want it that like when you don't know what's going to happen, you go to cash or gold.
Yeah, I mean, so you get these little mini runs. You get countries selling their treasury bonds, but you also, it's very interesting because the euro is stronger than a person would justify it being if there wasn't such a monopoly on the euro from City of London banks that are underwriting the euro, despite the fact that if they ever have to face reality and mark to market their actual assets or investments in Ukraine, like if Zelensky ever were to say like, okay, we're giving up the Donbass forever, or we're going to recognize Crimea and the Donbass as Russia, like then they couldn't evergreen these investments. They wouldn't ever have to make a statement like it's gone. Like they can keep kicking the can down the road. Mm-hmm. And that's what's floating the fucking euro, and there's no reason that that other than that and a few others similar, that the euro should be stronger than the dollar. But that's good though. That's good for American producers. Like if you're exporting to Europe, that's good to have. It's good to have a weak dollar, unless your components are also purchased from abroad. But if you're mainly domestic producing and you're reliant on domestically produced components and you're selling to European markets, like that's great. Maybe that's the plan. But
a devalued dollar is definitely the plan.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. It's been stated as such, but it's always in fluctuations. Like if you look at the chart, the euro has always been above the dollar. Like parity means that things are actually out of whack. So when you have a dollar that's worth a euro and vice versa, that usually means that the euro has been comparatively devalued compared to history, right? So
yeah, the historical is pretty much where we are right now is the historical trend. I mean, I've seen it as low as, or the euro as strong as 78 to the dollar. When I moved to Serbia, it was like 80-ish. A year ago, it was like 1-to-1. And I wish I had been able to exchange and had access to capital then. I had stuff frozen. People know what's happened to me. I've had to get stuff. I've had some lawsuits and stuff. I've been debanked. But now I'm changing. I'm building a house in Serbia. And I'm like, every day I'm trying to squeeze out an extra $1,000 or whatever. If it goes to 87, 88, that's my number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Not investment advice, everybody.
That's not investment. I'm just saying what I'm going to do.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good that we take a little time here to cover how a lot of this stuff actually applies in financial markets, because in a way it's a fractal, right?
Yes. There's patterns, there's trends. You can analyze them. It takes a shape, and you can like see that shape in your head. Profit.
Oh yeah. I mean, and for us, it's going to be financial profit. And when you apply it to civilizations, you're going to look at other kinds of profit, right? Ultimately, I think power is more the word for that, as opposed to money.
Yes. Yeah.
Power and
money
control.
Is not the power, is the power. A lot of people, just as we wrap up, a lot of people that are planning for the future and thinking about ways of surviving various scenarios that are in between collapse and Mad Max. They're concerned about holding assets in a way that they're not going to be able to, from a military perspective or security perspective, defend. Right? It's like the future in that iteration is going to belong to groups of veterans that have trained and fought together for a long time using weapons and shit. It's not going to be the people that built a grain silo or the guy who put gold bars away. Like that's going to make you a victim to the guys with a bunch of, cars with fucking spikes on them and machine guns.
Yeah.
And shit like that.
Yeah. Or even simpler, all the guys with the guns, which is right now the government.
That's the monopoly. But once that monopoly, we're talking about a failed state,
You're talking about, Mad Max. And,
yeah. I mean, that's what Australia with the Strait of Hormuz stuff. I mean, we're like, that's for the first time in my life. I know, because I was born after like the early 70s oil crunch. But for the first time in my life, like Australians are like, whoa, people are cut off. I've never seen that. That's wild. And then like, you can imagine the Australians and others like telling Trump, like, yo, wrap this up now.
Yeah, we predicted that on Rogue and before that on Algo Factory.
Brilliant.
Yeah, V the Gorilla does gold deals around the world and crypto deals when crypto is something to do. And long story short, he told us that all of his private equity buddies were talking about how phone calls are being made around the world. Like, hey, it's wrap this up. I could tell you if oil goes above 180, things will break. And if it goes above 200, things will really break. So I think, like you said earlier in this
You mean
show,
very quickly.
like I
Yeah,
mean,
because even like 120, 130, like sustained over 2-3 years, you're gonna have shit.
you'll have, I think what would happen is everything would rebalance. More oil will come from other places, but um, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Like because the market is so tight because so much debt is propping everything up. So when you have debt propping everything up, especially when it's the dollar, very minor moves in the macro
Mm.
can actually cause things to break. So yeah, it's a very sensitive
Yeah,
time.
there may be a conspiracy afoot to actually like get oil priced in our minds related to post-pandemic inflation, because like when we talk about 78 60 70 $80 a barrel, those are the same numbers that we use like from 2017 and 2018 to think about things, or 2019. But we've had, like, in reality, the like a 2019 dollar, right, that's like gonna buy you what, 60 or 70 cents worth of stuff today at best. So like, why are we talking about that oil at 70 or 80 is, it's almost like there could be a move to just reset our expectation. But what they're really doing is they could be trying to set oil prices to numbers, like in our minds and how we react, that are actually adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the moves to keep oil cheap, like in other words, if we talk about, and you mentioned before, like there is no Brent crude, right? Like, but if you talk about, let's say, $80 Brent crude and or $80 Brent crude in 2018, like those are two different $80. Like when we talk about $80 Brent crude today, that's got to be like $45 or $50. You see,
In 2018 dollars, definitely not the same dollars. It's a complex situation because the higher oil goes, the higher inflation goes. So there are a lot of.
So keeping oil down is disinflationary.
Mhm.
So that could also be a move. So I'm kind of, when I'm looking at the things going on with Iran, and I'm looking at how oil and how markets are responding to that, I'm trying to think the broader geoeconomic moves, and it's not everyone's on the same page. Not a conspiracy. There are conspiracies in collision, right?
Yeah. It's messy. If there were some form of agreement, it'd have to be quiet. And the problem with oil and making it profitable for nations like us, where it's expensive to produce it as compared to Russia, which is, it's a pittance to produce it. The volatility is a bit of a problem. Moving, and this is again, Tom Luongo talks about this, like moving 7% within a week, you're looking at Bitcoin levels of volatility.
Yes.
So what markets like is stability. So oil producers, okay, they're making good money on Monday, but not on Friday. That doesn't work for them. So yeah, maybe the readjustment of the oil price, I'm sure the market has a lot to do with that, but in the end, there probably will be a price setting that happens once things calm down and are a little more controllable.
We're all looking forward to it, and it would be nice if people were not being killed anymore too.
That's number one, if you ask me, but we'll see about it. Xoaquin Flores, thank you for so much time. Again, go to the description, add New Resistance on Telegram. We're going to put the X, we're going to put the, I'd say do the Patreon thing. Is if you do Joaquin's Patreon, you're actually going to get the recordings of his shows like right away. And I'm telling you guys, the shows are sometimes just 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes like 4 hours. Under any circumstance, it's always very dense with information. It's always very valuable. You're not going to get a lot of thinkers like Joaquin. So please check that out. And we will see you on the next installment, whenever that is. Soon, I'm sure.
Cool. Yes.
All right. Thanks, man.
Peace.
See you.